Welcome to the Indie Pub, a laid-back interview show dedicated to the world of self and indie publishing. I'm your host, Jay Rushing, author of the self-published fantasy noir novel Radio, and a beverage buff with a passion for deep dives and good times. Each episode, a guest will step into the pub with a publishing-related topic and a favorite drink for us to explore and enjoy. Whether you want to sharpen your craft, snag a new cocktail recipe, or just have a laugh, there's always a seat and a full glass waiting for you at the Indie Pub. Welcome to the Indie Pub. Today's guest is artist and author Kerstin Espinosa Rosero, whose debut novel, Burn Red Skies, is currently a finalist for SPFBO. She's here with us to get down and dirty with the elements. We're talking elemental magic. But before we dive in, tell us a bit about what we're drinking here in the pub.
All right, well, thanks for having me, Jim. I hope it's cool that I brought tea to a pub.
Absolutely.
Which is what I also do in real life in an actual pub, so I hope it's okay.
We've had tea in the past. It's totally fine.
Yeah, I love hot drinks in the evening. So we have Sencha green tea today, which is, I think, especially soothing. So I hope, is this your first time drinking it?
No, I've had it in the past. I'm not a huge tea person, so it's been a bit since I've tried it, but definitely have had it before.
All right, well, I mean, I only drink two types of tea, so I don't really know my way around other types of tea, so.
Nice. Have it locked in.
Yeah.
I mean, when you know what you like, right?
Yeah, for sure. But I mean, if you ask me any question regarding tea, I'll have no idea how to answer. Oh. That's what I wanted to say.
No, it's totally fine. Okay, tell us a little bit about yourself and your work.
All right, well, my work is Burn Red Skies. It's my debut novel, and it is a dark epic fantasy with dragons, elemental magic, and airship smugglers.
Nice.
It was inspired a lot by the world of Final Fantasy, especially 9 and Suikoden 2, which I'll be talking about, I think, because I'm having this phase where that's all I'm talking about recently. So just the idea of found families and sort of a ragtag group of adventurers and shenanigans.
All right, so let's dive in with elemental magic. So when somebody describes a magic system as being an elemental magic system, what does that mean to you?
Well, like for me, the first thing that immediately comes to mind is the classical elements like fire, water, earth, and air, like natural forces. Actually, when I thought about this answer some more, I was thinking of like the periodic table, which I thought would be really interesting, but I'd never thought about.
Yeah.
And now I kind of just want like a main character, like a protagonist to like master forces, like control over something like polonium or something.
That would be pretty good.
Yeah, but basically like the classical stuff.
Okay, so then along those lines, where would you describe kind of the dividing line, or what's the distinction between magic that uses the elements and a true elemental magic system?
So I think at least in the fantasy books and in video games that I've played, there are two types that I kind of that vibe with me the most. Mm-hmm. Like elemental forces that you harness that come naturally to you from either your surroundings or just, innate to the main character, at least, because it's always the main character who's sort of born with this. Yeah. And sort of elemental forces that are bestowed upon you either through some sort of fate or like divine being. Both are fun to read, I think.
Mm-hmm. Do you have a preference?
I think I just like the idea of someone just stumbling across this weird, this life-changing power through no fault of their own, like not being a chosen one or anything, mm-hmm. but just sort of herpa-derping through through the world and just coincidentally encountering some sort of elemental force. I do like the aspect of randomness in these stories.
Do you have an example of a story that you really like that kind of had that falling into the magic?
Well, so I read one of the SPFBO finalists, The Iron Crown, and it's sort of it has dragon forces, like dragon spirits. Some are actually mischievous, some are cruel, like they each have their own character. And if you meet them by chance, they might bestow some sort of gift or curse onto you.
Oh, interesting.
So it's very, very luck based.
I like that gift aspect.
Yeah. gift or curse.
Yeah.
Like gift in the sense of something's being given to you, but it's not necessarily good.
Yeah.
Which I thought was really cool. Because you never know what you're going to get.
So in your work, what are the sets of elements that you utilize in your magic system? Are you throwing around sulfur and nickel and neon, or is it more the traditional
Polonium? No.
Planet?
I wish I was. I wish I thought of that before this interview, but no, it's more like the classic Captain Planet stuff,
Gotcha.
like fire. Well, there's no wind or there is water. So it's basically, I love that show when I was a kid. I still don't know like what Heart does, but I loved him anyway.
Have you seen, it's been years now, I can't even remember how long ago it was, but have you seen the spoofs that got made where Don Cheadle played Captain Planet?
No, I haven't.
Oh, it's
Should I?
He definitely is not our childhood Captain Planet. That's all I'll say, but it's pretty funny.
Yeah. I'll give that a watch. Is it a show or?
No, I want to say maybe it was like a Funny or Die sketch or something, something from the 2010s or something like that. I can't remember exactly when, but it'd be something on YouTube, I'm sure.
Yeah, 2010 sounds like a good time to resurrect it for a bit.
Yeah, for sure. All right, so what made you choose the elements you did for your story?
Well, so in my book, elements sort of run through your blood, right? So there are characteristics that are sort of bound to them. Like obviously fire-blooded folks are a bit hot-headed. Like folks born with the water element tend to be like calmer, like restorative, like very zen. So I chose fire because it's classic, like it's, there's no way around it. Fire is like one of the most classic, hot-headed, fierce warrior types. And of course, ice is the classic counter force. So I chose those two definitely. There's also storm in my book, like a storm civilization.
That's cool.
There are folks who harness water elements so they can heal and they can cure. So those were basically the four that I chose. And there's also earth, but they're not really alluded to.
Gotcha.
They're just in the forest, sort of doing their own thing.
So with the connection between the elements and personality, is the magic something that, like the type of elemental magic they get, does it come to them because of their personality, or do they have the personality because they're influenced by the magic they use?
It tends to be the second one, where the personality tends to be influenced. Of course, not everyone, but that's the tendency. So in my book, elements sort of get weaker over time. So throughout the generations, it's getting weaker and weaker. So it sort of creates the dynamic where people with a lot of elements are at the top, and people and sort of like the common folk don't really have it anymore. And whenever that balance is upset, that's when the conflict starts.
So when you say a lot of elements, what do you mean by like one person able to control multiple, or just one person having a lot of control of one?
A lot of control over one.
Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
I see. And then you were saying earlier that it's societies tend to have, it's kind of blocked off into groupings. Is that so? Like there's the storm civilization. So would there be also a fire civilization? And
yes.
Okay. Nice. Now, no, go for it.
No, I just wanted to say, like, and then in a lot of like classic fantasy tropes, these civilizations tend to be at war. Makes things kind of interesting.
For sure, yeah. Can just see, because I mean, in nature, the elements battle each other, right? Or they, rock, paper, scissors, one beats the other in certain circumstances. So
yeah, exactly.
Now, when you were looking at collecting the elements you wanted to use, were there some that you purposefully avoided?
I wouldn't say I actively avoided any one of them, but because elements sort of create civilizations and entire cultures and peoples, it was just sort of logistics. I couldn't really.
Gotcha.
I wasn't actively avoiding one, but
okay.
I just didn't think of some. Like
gotcha.
To include some.
Gotcha. Okay. All right, let's jump back to our drink real quick.
All right.
Let's talk taste and smell. We always do this every episode because in writing, taste and smell are the most overlooked senses. So we're going to dive in and just tell me what you are picking up. What are the flavors, the smells, the notes, just the overall experience of drinking Sencha tea.
All right. Well, are you taking a sip with me?
Yes.
Okay. I'm picking up grassy herbal flavors.
Mm-hmm.
They're very soothing, and because I have this sort of enamel cast iron teapot, which doesn't absorb the flavors of the tea, this is a particularly flavorful cup.
Nice. So do the flavors stay the same front to back, like when you first sip versus the kind of the aftertaste, or does it change as it goes down?
It stays the same.
Okay.
That's why I am particularly proud of this teapot. But yeah.
Nice. Where did you find it? Was that something you found on your travels, or was it just something you stumbled upon?
I got it in a tea shop, which I thought was part of the experience because the lady was very enthusiastic about it. She knew her stuff.
Nice.
And I don't know. It sort of stuck with me. It's one of the few things since the Rona that I haven't bought online, so it has sentimental value.
Nice. Now, with your brand of tea, do you have one go-to that's like the one that you use, or do you bounce around?
I bounce around. Yeah.
Okay. So you're Germany, right?
Yes.
What would be, if you were, for our German listeners, what brand would you shoot them towards if you had to recommend one or two?
Oh, that's a hard question. I mean, I could just try to figure out the one that I'm drinking now because I don't have like a loyal,
Sure.
Like I'm not loyal to any particular brand. This one is called Chado.
Okay.
I might be mispronouncing it terribly. And I think, let me see, where did I get this teapot from? I really want to advertise that lady who was super enthusiastic about it.
Nice.
I mean, I guess it's a chain, but I usually get my tea at like Teig.
Okay.
Have you heard of that? Like, I don't know if it's in Switzerland as well.
I'm not sure if we have it or not. I feel like I may have seen a sign for that walking around back when travel was a thing. But
yeah, back when it was a thing. Exactly, right? So you understand why this is so sentimental for me,
for sure,
that I bought this teapot in person. But like you walk in and they have just like shelves of tea. It feels like an apothecary.
Yeah.
I think it's a chain though. So for our German listeners out there, I think you'll find it in every place, like every city.
Nice. And that was T. Schenkner, is that what you said?
I think Teig.
Teague, okay. Nice. Yeah, tea is something I wish I was more into. I'm very jealous of tea drinkers because I'm kind of like you. I've got the few that I really like, and then there's just this world of flavors and options out there. Just everywhere. Like you say, you walk into the store and it's like an apothecary, and you just, I want to try them all, but I'm not. For some reason, I can't get into it, and I need to. I guess I just need to have that moment, that experience. Maybe I need to stumble across the right lady selling a teapot who's just gonna like inspire me.
She'll change your life.
Exactly.
If you ever meet her, she'll change your life.
I talk about this anytime tea comes up on the show, just because it's weird and amazing. If you ever drink black teas, there's this brand called T2, like the letter and the number, and I can't remember if it's Australian or if it's English, but I know they have them in both places. But there's this one called New York Breakfast, and it tastes like pancakes. It's bizarre, but it's so good.
Like tastes like pancakes, or the feeling that you get with pancakes. Like
butter and syrup, and it's so strange. And it's not. I don't know. It doesn't have a bunch of chemicals or anything, like a bunch of artificial flavors soaked into it. It's just what they do with the spicing. There's some cinnamon chunks in there I can see, but other than that, I don't know what the mix is. But somehow they pull it off, and it's just so good. So that would definitely be one to check out.
New York Breakfast, right? So you said T2?
T2.
Like, T as in the drink tea or the letter?
The letter.
All right, cool.
It's like the old Terminator 2 ad where it's T2.
Makes it even better.
I know it's a little bit aggressive for a tea shop, but still. All right, so let's dive back to our elemental magic. So what impact does using an elemental magic system have on your writing? Do you think that you ever have to write differently because it's elemental magic versus a more standard magic system?
Well, actually, Bird and Red Skies is my debut novel, so I don't have any basis of comparison. Like, I only know how to write this magic system.
That's fair. So then what would be some of the unique challenges then of writing a elemental magic system?
I think like there's always going to be sort of doubt in the back of my head because a lot of fantasy systems are based on elemental magic, and I'm just always and I haven't read all of them. Obviously, I haven't seen all of them, and it always puts me in some sort of doubt. Like, am I writing something that everyone's writing, or am I writing something that is in like this super huge show or book or whatever, and people might think I'm stealing it. So it's like, and like some things sort of influence you subconsciously. Like, am I doing it without knowing?
For sure, yeah.
Like the first time I told someone about my book, like, oh, it has fire elements, and they're hot-headed, and basically they're the reigning civilization, and people are like, my friends reacted with, oh, it's sort of like The Last Airbender, and I was like, oh no, like, did I just like steal from them somehow or something like that. So,
well, it's funny the kind of the evolution from, because I mean everything is borrowed and shifted and changed, and kind of that evolution from once things have been borrowed enough times, it just becomes a trope. And then it's fine. It's just you're just using the trope everyone else uses, and it's that kind of gray area between too close to the original and fully a trope. I would say with elemental magic, you're far into trope land. I think it's all safe to use. Yeah.
I'm not pretending otherwise.
Oh yeah, no, for sure. I wouldn't either.
Yeah, but it's like, I think a big concern of mine, at least when I write elemental magic, is this like, I know it's a trope, but sometimes it's too much of a trope where it's old and stale.
Yeah.
And that's what I kind of want to avoid, which is, I think, the main challenge of writing about something that so many have written before.
Mm-hmm. How did you approach that? That's interesting. Did you have any sort of, I don't know, some sort of way to pump the brakes for yourself, or any sort of warning sign you would see come up as you were writing?
I think once the elements in my book became too convenient, like when a character could just like summon it like this, it loses its realism. And there are a lot of books I've read where characters just sort of magically are able to harness these powers without much explanation, which is great. But I feel like for me, it was like once they became too convenient, maybe it was time to check myself.
So thinking about that, how do the elements in your story behave? Is conjuring fire just, hey, here's some fire, or can it take on shapes or become animate, or what specifically are kind of the physics of your magic in your story?
Oh man, physics is a strong word.
For sure.
I'll try to explain it without using the word physics. So basically, people who can harness elemental fire, they harness fire that is stronger than natural fire. So basically, like dragon fire is much stronger than the normal fire you take, like in a campfire, for example. And same with storm, same with ice. So basically, people who are born with fire cannot burn.
Okay.
People who are born with ice cannot die by ice, and that sort of thing. So how they behave is like I mentioned, like with these civilizations over generations, they become weaker and weaker. So people are really trying to find people who can harness these elements and sort of, make them work for the system, basically. They're treated like royalty, literally.
So can you give us some examples of, let's take the classic fire element wielder. What would be kind of a small, medium, and large use of that magic?
That's a good question, actually, because because people are born with different levels. So people who are who have like weak fire elements, maybe they can summon it, maybe they can't. Maybe they can burn because they've sort of mixed with other elements over time. So maybe like a weak exhibition of fire would just be to like light a match or something, or light a candle.
Gotcha.
Like the average fire wielder, they usually cannot burn. They can usually harness fire as a weapon, but obviously it's not very strong. I mean, that's... And then you have strong fire wielders, like the antagonist, or I guess antagonist is questionable. It's up for debate in my book, where she can actually summon the spirit of a dragon. So this means she cannot burn, and she can burn other fireborn as well. So that's like extreme mega. Like, what is it? True ending fire. Like,
no, when you say use fire as a weapon, what does that look like?
Sort of comes from like visually, or just how does it work?
Yeah, so like I'm thinking like, is it... I guess the two ways I think of it in my head is you can have like projectile fire, or like fire that looks like a sword, or it's still like on the flip side, it's this kind of, you know, nebulous fire the way fire is, but that is being controlled. Is it kind of fall into one of those two camps?
Depends on how strong you are at fire. So some of the weaker casters can sort of like just create a blob, like a cloud of smoke maybe, but the stronger your elements are, the more control you have over it.
Nice.
So strong casters can, if they wanted to, make like fire animals. Swords.
That's pretty great. Okay, so tangentially along these lines of, if it's not a spoiler, of all of these, I guess, spells, I don't know if it counts as spells in elemental magic, but of all of the things that get cast, what is your favorite that happens in the story?
I mean, aside from the dragon.
I mean, the dragon's a pretty good one.
I like Storm, actually. Yeah. Because it's like the most, at least in my book, it's the most intense element. And Stormcasters are very rare. Like they just sort of, they're nomads, so they just sort of, you know, like walked off and were never found again. So finding one is very rare.
So again, if it's not a spoiler, what would be, so you have your Stormcaster. What's the whether, you know, it's a big moment or just something small, what's that thing where you're just like, oh yeah, that's good, where when you wrote it, you know, where you're just like, yes, I love this scene. What was it that they did? How did they use that magic?
Well, I mean, the one character who casts it just does it for like really petty reasons, like just to piss people off. So like, you know, he just zaps people he's annoyed with, for example, that sort of thing. But because he's also a strong Stormcaster, he can defend himself when they fight back. So there's a scene where he creates like a lasso out of Storm. Like the rest would be a spoiler, but if you can imagine like this cyclone coming from his arm.
Oh, that's cool. So that's a really great visual. I like that.
Yeah.
Speaking of how the magic functions, my next question I want to kind of take in two different directions. So the first is, are there any rules and structure that apply to the magic within your world? So I want to kind of know about that. And then the follow-up question to that would be, what are some rules and structures you have for yourself while writing that type of magic?
Oh, which one do we concentrate on first?
Whichever you'd prefer.
Let's talk about rules in the magic system, because I think for me it was the freest part of writing, because there aren't really strict rules, because a lot of this is inborn, which is very like, it's more like emotional. People cast elements when they're emotional or angry, you know. So there is some sort of elemental science to it that scholars have in the world of the book, where, for example, people can harness fire in alchemy, where they can enhance armor. And so it sounds like Skyrim when I explain it like this. Where they can use their elements to strengthen other things, basically. So that's like an entire science in the book. It's not really its own section, but it's there. Aside from that, there aren't really a lot of rules.
Okay.
But it doesn't mean that they're too convenient. It just means people don't really know much about them.
Yeah. So thinking about the really strong wielders, did you kind of in the back of your head have some sort of kind of cap you would place on where their magic can go? Or is it the type of magic where it's open-ended and as long as they can handle it, they can do it?
Well, it's open-ended in that sense. Like there's a lot of potential with these elements, but other civilizations have learned how to defend themselves against it. Like,
I see.
For example, if someone can harness the power of dragons, then you have other civilizations who developed armor who built to withstand fire, for example.
Gotcha.
So it's not like one person's ever going to be super like invincible, basically. Like people have means to defend themselves.
Yeah. Okay, and then to the other side of the question, as you're writing all of this, as you're coming up with these societies and how each of these elements work within that magic system, what are some of the things that you do as a writer to kind of wrangle all of that in your head and in your writing?
You mean like how do I keep track of the elements, or how do
just when you how do you approach creating those magic systems in those societies, and then once you've created them, how do you approach kind of managing them throughout the story?
All right, so writing wise, so the first draft, like everybody speaks hatred about their first drafts, but I think it's very useful because I just throw everything I have in those drafts, like world building, info dumps, like I take a very video game approach. Like if you've read like video game walkthroughs, you have like fire, luck 50, or just like stats. Like stats. And then I sort of have character sketches of like a typical villager with this sort of fire element and like what his day looks like. Stuff like that. So my first draft was actually over 1,000 pages, if you can believe.
Oh, whoa.
I also got shook when I finished my first draft. And it was just all like, how do I approach these elements? What can they do and what can't they do? Mm-hmm. What are the characteristics? Because it's bound to people's blood usually. And like, how does it affect their daily lives? And how does it affect other civilizations' perspective of them? So it was over 100 pages, and the current book is like 420. So
nice.
It was a lot of editing.
Yeah, I like to think of kind of the two main camps of writing as sculptors or painters. And you definitely seem like the sculptor, where you just kind of get this big block out there and then start chipping away at it. Yeah. I tend to be the opposite. I'm more of the like, add a little bit here, add a little bit there, wipe a little bit off. Like but I always really admire and find I can't wrap my head around how you all do that, but I always find it like just being able to have like just all of the ideas right in front of you ready to go. It's such an interesting style, I guess you would say. I really like that.
I wish I do wish no, I don't wish it, but I think sometimes I would benefit from not doing that so much, because I did cut my book down to like by over half. That's pretty extreme.
But I bet there's a lot of I don't know if you are going to do a sequel, but there's probably a lot of fodder for a sequel in some of those scrapped pages.
Yep. Yeah, there is. That's where a lot of the content went. Now, speaking of which, though, my sequel is coming out on Tuesday, the 22nd.
Oh, nice. Of February or March?
February.
Nice.
So 2/22/22. I felt really clever, but it turns out a lot of books are releasing that date. So.
All right. Yeah. Well, congrats. That's huge news.
Yeah, thanks. I wasn't expecting it, to be honest. I wrote Burn Red Skies for like my family, basically, like expecting my family to read it, and that's it. Like I had no expectations, like maybe friends, one or two, and then it became a finalist in SPFBO.
Yeah.
Or for some of you, SPFBO. I know for some that's such a like, painful, sensitive topic. So I was not expecting that at all. I didn't even know I was still in the running until it became a finalist.
Nice.
So it was pretty motivating. And because of that, because of the love and support that it's gotten, because of this contest, I finished the sequel. And
that's great.
Yeah. I mean, I'm surprised. So if you're listening, thank you. If you've made it this far.
Speaking, you said something earlier in your last answer that I wanted to jump back to. You talked specifically about basically what your magic can and can't do, and how that was a kind of an important factor in how you moved through writing your story. Talk a little bit more about that if you can. I'm really curious, like what, as you thought about those boundaries, where did your gut fall on where those boundaries should be? And then maybe a little bit about why it ended up that way.
Okay, I think I can answer that. I think I mentioned before that it all had to do with convenience. Like, am I using this as plot armor or as something that is truly an asset to this character and this plot? Some scenes I wrote in my 1,000+ pages, like, where people just cast it, like for example, fire, and they just won every fight they could. And life was very easy for them. And I reread that character and I was like, come on, man, like really, Kerstin, like that's not. So I started with those boundaries. Like, is this character too powerful? Like, is it too convenient for them? Like, is their life made enriched by these elements, or is it just being run by these elements? And I think, for example, having elements enrich the storyline, enrich the characters' lives became much more important to me than having them solve their problems. And like when you're writing it the first time around, like the first draft, you don't really notice because you love all your characters equally, of course. You should, I think you understand.
Oh, absolutely.
You want them to be perfect and succeed in everything they do. So if we start off with my debatable antagonist, like if you can call her the antagonist, she is very powerful. She summons this dragon. So people see, or at least people in the book think that she's invincible, but she's not. There are some things that people don't know about yet, maybe that she's also not invincible to. Is that the right word? Like that she's not. I need a better word for that. That she's not.
Like that she's still vulnerable to, maybe?
Yeah, that's way better.
No,
did I mention that I'm writing a book?
So when you mentioned, how do I put this? It was, you were talking about the convenience factor. And it sounds like that was a really big kind of idea to have to wrestle in writing this story, is where that convenience falls. Did you find that the solution more often came from pulling back on how much power there was, or did it come from putting roadblocks in the way of that power?
Pulling back.
Okay. Because
like, a lot of, myself included, a lot of writers write characters that they sort of want to be like, we all want to be a fire wielding, dragon summoner. But at some point, I was reading my 1,000 pages and was wondering, like, all right, is this just me hoping, like wishing that I had these powers? And if so, then that's not a good story, Kerstin. Like, no, Kerstin, you cannot have fire powers.
A little wish fulfillment never hurt anybody.
Yeah, that's true. I mean, there is some, but
it's good motivation.
Yeah, for sure. Yeah, so a lot of solutions came from pulling it back and having characters find other ways to solve their problems.
What would be, so when you say other ways to solve the problems, is that basically just kind of the way us normies would, or yeah, is it still within the realm of the magic?
The way us normies would, because okay. some people, they have armor against fire, so what do you do, right? So
sure you
have to be taken down a notch and sort of do things the way that we normals would.
All right, so let's jump back to our drink again. And if you're willing, I'd like to do a little bit of world building, or I'd like you to do a little bit of world building. Can you go ahead and maybe try to just create a scene for us? What if you were going to take this tea and be transported anywhere to enjoy it to its fullest, where you're having the best possible time you can, and it's just the perfect place to enjoy a cup of this tea? What would that look like? Where would it be? Just kind of paint that world for us.
So I'm going to talk about the perfect moment, I did enjoy this tea.
Oh, awesome. Great. Okay.
So I used to train in a Thailand boot camp, boxing, right? Love it.
Nice.
Kickboxing, but it was very, very grueling. 6 days a week,
Oof.
7 hours a day, right? So like I was dead, like just physically and mentally.
I
just
can
gone.
imagine. Jeez.
I thought it was a great idea before I went, but like so I was there for over a month. And at some point you just lose your memory. Like it was a great experience, but
you come out changed whether you want to or not, and something like that. I would imagine.
It sounds like a negative thing, but I loved it. I really did. But that's when I started drinking hot tea every night.
Nice.
So it was in Thailand, so at night. So imagine like 30 to 40 degrees, in the evening, no air conditioning, no technology, which was the best. And like I grew up in the San Francisco area. I studied in like Munich, in Taipei, so I'm used to big cities, right? But this small place in the Fight Village, it was even called the Fight Village, was just the perfect place to enjoy this tea. So after a grueling day of training, where I think my soul just departed from its body,
Yeah.
and like my friends at the time, like at the camp, they were drinking like protein drinks, and it's always like give your best, give 110%, and I was just there with my tea. So I think that's the perfect place to enjoy it. Like if I were to sort of make a fantasy scene around it, I would sort of make a former orc warrior or something who just sort of retreats to the countryside, to the village in a hut, just to enjoy his tea, like every night. And nothing comes between this warrior and his tea, or her,
Yeah.
And so no matter what she does, I'm gonna go with female orc warrior. No matter what she does, right? Like even if she's vanquishing villains or whatever, at 6 p.m., 7 p.m. every night, she has to have her tea.
I love this because one thing that I think is kind of tricky when you're writing is remembering just how important the small moments are too. Right. And so just being able to set those scenes where it's just somebody with a cup of tea, coming down from a stressful day, like having those small spaces, I think is really important. So that's great. I love that scene. Man, that was, what city were you in Thailand, or what Fight Town, was it Fight Village or
Fight Village?
Fight
Village.
Phuket. Just keep it simple. What do we do here is Fight Village. We fight. And that makes total sense.
The best.
So was that like a part of a city, or is it literally just the village is Fight Village?
It's part of a city. Like
okay.
It was in Phuket.
Oh, I see. So kind of like a neighborhood of Phuket then.
Yeah, and that was all, like, it was just all fight villages, fight gyms. Like you go to an ice cream parlor and they serve protein powder ice cream. That's how extreme it was.
Oh wow. Okay.
Mildly terrifying.
And was it Muay Thai or was it?
Yes.
Okay, nice.
Yeah, that's my jam.
Or do you still compete, or at least train?
Yes, I train.
Nice. That's awesome. Yeah, and where you're Frankfurt, is it, or Berlin?
It's close to Heidelberg.
Oh, so, that's right. We talked about that. I love Heidelberg.
Yeah, like if I had to choose in terms of proximity, it would be Frankfurt.
Okay, so let's jump back into our elemental magic. Do you think you can give us some classic or impressive examples of elemental magic systems that our listeners might be familiar with? And obviously books are fair game, but this could also be TV, movies, comics, manga, anything, whatever.
Okay, I think a lot of the elemental magic systems that stuck to my mind have been actually from shows and video games, especially because it has such a visual element to it.
Yeah.
And I hate to keep referring back to Final Fantasy, but
no, I mean that was an inspiration, right?
Yeah, for sure. I know opinions are mixed about Final Fantasy VIII. I personally loved it, at least the elemental aspect of it, where people sort of summon guardian forces, and these guardian forces come to help them, but at a great risk, or at a great cost, rather. So I love that. I love that idea, like exchanging power for at some sort of cost.
Yeah.
Basically, like loss of humanity, or something extreme too. So it's not just like, oh, here's some money. You've like something that actually costs something.
For sure, yeah.
I think that's my jam. Like Final Fantasy, Suikoden, the concept of like maybe runes, like having different rune stones where you throw one and some sort of elemental attribute comes out.
Gotcha, yeah. Okay, so thinking about some of these stories and worlds, why do you think their elemental magic systems were so successful? What made them stand out to you? What made them so memorable to you?
I think elemental magic in general stands out to me because it's a magic system that we actually already have. Like we all know what fire feels like. We know what water does. We know what ice does. It's something that everyone is familiar with. We don't have to describe what being burned feels like. And I think it stands out because it's something we already have. We just harness it in a different way, like with technology or whatever. And I think the fun part about writing it is that all you have to do is determine the rules.
Yeah.
It's already there.
That's a really great point. I hadn't thought about that before. But the fact that it's all known. And that's super unique for magic, because magic is, green gases and specters and this and that all the time, these otherworldly supernatural things. And I had never thought of that it's just stuff. It's just everyday stuff being used in this magical way.
Yeah, like, I mean, a lot of things in fantasy, like elemental scenes, like can probably be reproduced by us, like using technology, of course.
Sure, yeah. Okay, so then kind of flip side of that coin, can you think of any examples of elemental magic that kind of went sideways, where it didn't quite work, and what was it that made them fall flat?
All right, so I'm not going to mention specifics, but trends that I sort of don't vibe with, usually chosen one trope. But in terms of elements, meaning that someone is bestowed with such crazy powerful magic that they can overcome anything. Like I don't vibe with that sort of trope, because it just gives you absolute power and there's no challenge, I guess.
Sure.
Like there's no growth for the character if they're already at the top and stay there.
Yeah.
There are magic systems that have too many rules. I hate to say that, but I feel like if you're reading a book, at least this is completely personal taste. If I'm reading a book, I want to, follow the story. I want to follow the characters, and some books get really, really caught up in the rules of the book, which is great, but it sort of takes the spontaneity out of it. Like unless the character is like a professor of elemental science, I don't know why the character would know everything about it.
Sure, that makes a ton of sense. Yeah, some of the best fantasy writing advice I ever got was that the more you explain, the more you have to explain. And it's just kind of this never-ending cycle of the deeper you dig yourself, the deeper you have to keep digging. And I think that's kind of what you're talking about, where it's, you get so far where you just, every little thing has to have an explanation or a reason or this and that. And it does kind of slow the whole flow down, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, if it's important for us to know, like it's great, like why not? But if it's just out there, if it's just thrown in and never mentioned again, then I don't know. But I do like the spontaneity of these magic systems. Some structure is great, but if there are too many rules, then for me at least, it takes me out of the journey.
Yeah. All right, so what would be some advice you would give somebody who's trying to attempt their very first story with elemental magic?
I'm gonna go back to convenience. Don't make it too convenient for people. It's great to give someone absolute power, but what does that mean for the other characters? And basically, obviously elemental magic is a plot device no matter how you look at it, but don't make it the plot device.
Yeah.
Like, if somebody is being cornered by their worst enemy and they're in grave danger, don't make them suddenly able to, solve their, beat their way through with elemental magic.
what are some things that you'd like to see more? Stuff that hasn't really come up, but you think would be really interesting for somebody to kind of run away with?
I would love to find someone to read about a character who was, comes across elemental magic somehow, whether it be bestowed upon them or, they had it all along or whatever, but spending a lot of the book not knowing how to use it. I think we need more of that, where people just sort of derp around.
Yeah.
And just sort of having it be a learning experience. Because a lot of the times folks, or characters rather, they just know how to use it right away or very, very fast. And that journey is missing. And I kind of want to see someone derp their way through a book.
Yeah. No, that's a really good point. I mean, you see that a lot just with, I guess with a lot of aspects of writing is forgetting that like being able to physically do something doesn't always come along with the knowledge of why that works. And that knowledge is something you kind of have to gather a little bit later on. Let's see. Why don't we end with one last question? If you were going to write a book using the periodic table of elements, what would be, if your character, if you were a character in that story, what element would your character wield and why?
Gold.
Gold?
I have no advanced knowledge of the periodic table of elements. But I think being able to wield gold or turn things into gold would be a huge advantage in any fantasy world.
For sure. That's very fair. All right, Kerstin, it's last call here at the Indie Pub. Can you give an indie published book or two or more that you think other people should check out?
All right. So, I mean, obviously, a lot of SPFBO contestants. Any of the finalists are amazing. Like I mentioned, Iron Crown, I read most recently. And some of the other semi-finalists as well, like the Seasons of ALBADONE, stuck to me a lot. It's like 4 short stories interconnected about the spirit of a forest, really. So I'd give that a recommendation. And one of the last things I've read is an ARC. I'm actually gonna geek out about it a bit. It's called
go for it.
Legends and Lattes. I don't know if you've seen that floating around the the socials, but it's about an orc warrior who just wants to open up a cafe.
Nice.
Yeah, I feel like this book reached me at the perfect time.
That's pretty great. Yeah. Just an orc who likes a good cup of joe,
Yeah, like that's basically the story, but it's advertised as low stakes, but the emotional investment is pretty high.
That's pretty great. I like that. As a big time coffee drinker, that's very, very much up my alley. Okay, same question, but for any other media, indie or not, what do you think people need to be checking out?
ARCANE.
Yeah.
Spontaneous.
Yeah, I went away for the holidays and only made it about halfway through. I got to dive back in because my wife and I are watching it together, and so it's one of those things where it is off limits to watch any of it unless we're watching it together. So we gotta jump back in. But yeah, that so far of what I've seen is fantastic.
Yeah, so it's split up into thirds. I'm not going to spoil it. Don't worry. It's split up into thirds.
Okay.
So, 3 episodes.
Yeah.
Per third. Obviously, the first 3, I thought, well, it's pretty cool. The next third, I was like, wow, this is great. And the last third, I'm like, oh, I don't know how I thought the last 3 episodes were great because this is fantastic.
Nice. Have you heard? Are they planning on doing more, or is this a one and done type show?
I hope they're doing more, but I've also read that if so, it won't be in 2022, which is
okay.
But who knows? Maybe they'll surprise us.
Yeah.
Gives us more time to rewatch it over and over again. I've seen it 4 times.
Yeah. Well, the animation is just gorgeous.
It's so unique. It's so individual.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, because you're an artist too, right? Like that's kind of another facet of your life, right?
Yeah. Like at least with ARCANE, each character is so lovingly animated, and they have their own mannerisms. Like the way Powder, I don't know if you noticed, like in the first episode or 2, the way she walks downstairs is very unique to Powder.
Yeah.
no other character does that. It's just powder. And it's such a small thing that nobody notices, but it's very endearing, I think.
Yeah.
So much love in it.
All right, Kerstin, tell our listeners what you have going on and where they can find you and your work.
All right, so I'm releasing my sequel on Tuesday, on the 22nd of February, which is also the day Legends and Lattes is coming out, by the way. So they can find me on the socials. I have Twitter and Instagram. I think I'm the only person on social media named Kerstin Espinosa Rosero. So it's pretty easy to find me.
Thanks.
I'm also working on an anthology on grief called The Alchemy of Sorrow. I don't know if you've seen that floating around the socials, but as an illustrator, not as an author. So I'm really excited about that. It's 13 short stories from 13 fierce, powerful authors that I'm excited to be working with.
Oh, that's great.
Yeah. So hopefully our Kickstarter, we have one. It's already been met, our base goals.
Nice.
So hopefully we'll get some stretch goals met along the way. Hint,
Nice.
Just dropping that in case you're curious, anyone out there.
Thanks everyone for tuning in to the Indie Pub. If you like what you hear, consider giving us a like and subscribe so you won't miss any of our indie investigations or boozy banter. I've been your host, Jay Rushing, and we'll see you back in the pub next time.